The wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing through the small frontier town of Red Rock with a fury that promised no mercy. Snow whirled in an unending dance, blurring the lines between earth and sky. The blizzard was relentless, a white monster that devoured all signs of warmth and life. In the midst of this tempest, a lone figure stood at the town's edge, her silhouette stark against the swirling chaos. Her name was Eleanor Whitaker, but to the people of Red Rock, she was simply the widower woman marked by misfortune and whispered curses. Her husband had perished 6 months prior in a mining accident, leaving her with a small child and a reputation for bringing ill luck. They had tolerated her presence during the warmer months, but now, as the storm raged, their fear turned to hostility. "We don't need your kind round here when the weather turns," Old Man Jenkins had said, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who saw spirits in every shadow. The others had nodded, their eyes averted, unwilling to confront the guilt that twisted in their guts. Eleanor had pleaded, her voice a fragile thread against the roaring gale. "Please, I have a child. We have nowhere else to go." Her words fell on deaf ears, the townsfolk resolute in their superstition. And so, with only a meager bundle of belongings and her infant son swaddled tightly against her chest, Eleanor was cast out, left to brave the blizzard that sought to swallow all in its path. The cold was a relentless adversary, biting through her thin cloak, seeping into her bones with a cruel tenacity. Each step was a battle, her feet sinking into the snow as she pushed forward, driven by a primal need to protect the life that nestled against her heart. The child stirred, a soft whimper escaping his lips, a sound almost lost to the wind's savage song. Eleanor paused, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her gaze sweeping across the endless expanse of white. Somewhere beyond this frozen purgatory lay shelter, safety, but it might as well have been a world away. The storm showed no sign of relenting, each gust a reminder of the town's cruel judgment. Yet, beneath the layers of fear and fatigue, a spark of defiance flickered within her. She would not succumb to the fate they had condemned her to. As she pressed on, memories of the past clawed at her mind. She had come to Red Rock with dreams of a new life. Her husband, Thomas, full of promises of prosperity and happiness. They had built a home, humble but filled with laughter, until tragedy had struck and left her adrift in a sea of whispers and sidelong glances. Her grip tightened around her child, her resolve hardening with each step. She would survive this, not just for herself, but for the boy who depended on her. Hours passed, the storm unyielding, her body numbed by the cold. Eleanor's mind began to drift, the line between reality and hallucination blurring as exhaustion took its toll. Visions of her husband danced before her eyes, his smile a beacon of hope that guided her through the endless whiteness. But just as she felt her strength waning, hope appeared like a mirage in the desert. A cabin, half buried by snow, its windows dark but promising refuge. With renewed determination, Eleanor staggered towards it, her footsteps faltering as she reached the threshold. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan, the inside as cold and unwelcoming as the storm outside. Yet, it was shelter, and for that she was grateful. She stumbled inside, shutting the door against the howling wind, her breath misting in the frigid air. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a single room with a hearth, a rickety table, and a straw mattress. It was enough. Eleanor laid her child on the mattress, wrapping him in what blankets she could find before turning to the hearth. Her fingers were clumsy with cold as she fumbled to light a fire, the kindling stubbornly refusing to catch. Frustration and fear clawed at her, but she forced herself to remain calm, focusing on the small tasks that would ensure their survival. Finally, a flame flickered to life, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. Eleanor sagged with relief, the warmth seeping into her frozen limbs like a bomb. She returned to her child, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead, murmuring soft assurances. "We'll be all right, my love. We'll make it through." As the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of respite, her eyes closing as exhaustion claimed her. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw the town of Red Rock, the faces of those who had turned her away, etched into her memory. She felt no anger towards them, only a deep, abiding sadness. They were victims of their own fears, prisoners of a world that had taught them to shun what they could not understand. But if she survived this night, she vowed to return, not for vengeance, but for justice, for herself, for her child, and for those who would come after her. The storm continued its assault on the world outside, but within the small cabin, Eleanor and her son lay cocooned in a fragile warmth, the fire a beacon against the darkness. It was a night that would test the limits of endurance, but she was no stranger to hardship. Whatever the storm had to throw at her, she would endure, because to do otherwise was unthinkable. In the town of Red Rock, the townsfolk huddled in their homes, doors barred against the storm, their thoughts drifting to the woman they had cast out. Some felt a twinge of regret, others a grim satisfaction in believing they had warded off misfortune. But as the night wore on, a change was coming to Red Rock, a reckoning born of the blizzard's fury and the indomitable spirit of a woman left to die. The wind howled mercilessly across the desolate expanse, whipping up spirals of snow that danced in the air like ghostly apparitions. The widow, Sarah, clutched her infant son tightly to her chest, her shawl wrapped around them both in a desperate attempt to stave off the biting cold. Her mind was a tumult of emotions, anger, fear, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. The townsfolk of Stillwater had been her community, or so she thought, until superstition and fear turned them against her. Branded as a harbinger of misfortune after a string of mishaps struck the town, she had pleaded her innocence. Her cries fell on deaf ears, and now here she was, cast out into the storm like an unwanted stray. It was only a matter of time before the freezing temperatures claimed her and her child. Yet, beneath her fear burned a fierce determination. She staggered forward, each step a laborious effort, as the snow reached up to snare her boots like quicksand. Somewhere, in the depths of her soul, a primal instinct whispered a single command: survive. Her thoughts drifted to her late husband, John, taken too soon by the harsh realities of frontier life. He had been her rock, her protector. Without him, she had been left vulnerable to the whims of the townspeople. But John had also taught her to be strong, to never yield. His memory spurred her on. As the storm raged on, the light began to fade, and the temperature plummeted even further. Sarah's breaths came out in ragged gasps, each one a silent plea for mercy. Just when despair threatened to overwhelm her, a flicker of movement caught her eye through the swirling whiteout. It was a cabin, weather-beaten and half-buried under snowdrifts. Salvation. With her last reserves of strength, she made her way towards it, the promise of shelter igniting a spark of hope within her weary heart. Reaching the cabin, Sarah pushed against the door, which groaned and gave way under her weight. Inside, it was dark and musty, but it was refuge. She set her son down gently on a makeshift bed of burlap sacks and began to scavenge for anything that could warm them. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, found a flint and steel. Minutes later, a small fire flickered to life in the hearth, its warmth a balm against the cold that had seeped into her very bones. Sarah cradled her son close, his small body finally relaxing as he drifted into a fitful sleep. As the storm howled outside, a new resolve took root in Sarah's heart. She would survive this trial, not just for herself, but for her son. The town of Stillwater had cast her out, but she would not let them dictate her fate. Days passed in a blur of snow and silence. Sarah rationed what little provisions she found in the cabin, eking out a meager existence on stale biscuits and melted snow. Each day, she ventured outside, braving the elements to gather more wood for the fire. Each return to the cabin a triumph against the odds. The storm eventually subsided, leaving behind a world blanketed in white, pristine and deadly. It was during one of these forays for wood that Sarah spotted them hoofprints, fresh and unmistakable, cutting through the snow like scars across the land. Her pulse quickened. These were not the tracks of townsfolk coming to search for her. No, these were different. She followed them cautiously, her senses alert. The tracks led her to a small encampment nestled in a hollow, concealed from prying eyes by a thicket of snow-laden pines. There were men there, rough-looking and armed, their campfire casting ominous shadows across their faces. Bandits. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The same bandits that had been rumored to be terrorizing the territories, their name whispered with dread by those unlucky enough to cross their path. Yet, as she watched them, an idea began to form. These men were dangerous, yes, but they were also her chance, her unlikely allies in a world turned hostile. Her mind raced, weighing options, the risks against the rewards. She had nothing left to lose. That night, after returning to the safety of the cabin, Sarah formulated a plan. She would approach the bandits, appeal to something resembling honor among thieves. They would help her, she decided, or they would regret not doing so. At dawn, she left the cabin, her son bundled securely against her back. The snow crunched underfoot as she retraced her steps back to the bandit camp. Her heart pounded with each step, fear and determination warring within her. As she neared the camp, she raised her voice, announcing her presence before stepping into view. The bandits reacted instantly, weapons drawn and eyes narrowed with suspicion. Sarah held up her hands, showing she meant no harm. "I'm not here to fight," she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "I need your help." The leader, a grizzled man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, appraising her with a cold, calculating gaze. "And why should we help you, Missy?" he drawled, suspicion lacing his words. Sarah met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I can offer you something in return. The townsfolk of Stillwater, they left me to die, but I know their weaknesses, their secrets. Help me, and I'll help you get what you want from them." The bandits exchanged glances, the prospect of easy plunder too tempting to dismiss outright. The leader's eyes gleamed with interest. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, a grudging respect coloring his tone. "All right, we'll hear you out, but cross us, and you'll wish the cold had finished you." With that uneasy truce, they led her into the camp, where plans began to take shape. As she spoke, detailing the layout of the town, its defenses, and the wealth it hoarded, Sarah felt a mix of dread and anticipation. She was playing a dangerous game, but she was no longer a pawn. The storm had forged her into something stronger, sharper, and she would see this through, for herself and for her son. As the sun began to set beyond the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, a biting wind swept across the snow-laden terrain, carrying with it the whispers of the past and echoes of unspoken grievances. Mary O'Hara, the widow who had been cast out from her community with her infant daughter, trudged through the knee-deep snow with a hardened resolve in her step. The blizzard that had threatened to claim her life had passed, leaving a crystalline world in its wake, but the fierce determination in her heart burned hotter than ever. Her child's soft coos, muffled beneath the layers of blankets strapped to her chest, reminded her of the stakes at hand. Each step was a testament to her grit, each breath a defiance against the cruel judgments that had sought to bury her beneath the relentless snows. Her mind was fixed on what lay ahead, a town that had wronged her, and a chance for redemption. But first, there was survival. She knew the mountains well, having traversed them alongside her late husband. His untimely death, an accident during one of his mining expeditions, had left her at the mercy of a superstitious town eager to blame their misfortunes on an outsider. Yet, it was his knowledge of the land that now guided her like a spectral hand, steering her towards a remote cabin nestled in a hidden valley, a refuge he had often spoken of, a place where they had once dreamed of building a life away from the judging eyes of others. Mary pushed onward, the weight of her child in her arms a comforting burden. She felt a surge of gratitude for the survival instincts honed by her time living on the frontier. The mountains were harsh, but they were honest and like the people she had left behind, who cloaked their fear and ignorance in the guise of righteousness. The path was treacherous, with jagged rocks hidden beneath the snow and the threat of avalanches looming overhead. Each slip and stumble tested her endurance, each moment a battle against the elements that sought to strip her of her resolve. But Mary was not alone. As the shadows lengthened, she stumbled upon the tracks of a band of horses. Her heart quickened. The thought of encountering others in the wilderness filled her with both hope and dread. If they were friendly, they might provide aid and shelter. If not, she would have to rely on every ounce of wit and courage she possessed to protect her child. She followed the tracks cautiously, her senses heightened, every sound magnified against the stillness of the snow-cloaked forest. The distant crackling of a fire reached her ears, and as she crested a ridge, she found herself gazing down at a small encampment nestled within a copse of trees. Her breath caught at the sight of men huddled around a fire, their figures silhouetted against the flickering flames. Bandits, she thought, her heart sinking, the very kind of men who might have been responsible for the attack on her town. Yet, as she watched, a plan began to form in her mind. Steeling herself, Mary approached the camp with cautious steps. Her appearance startled the men, and they rose, hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. "Easy now," she called out, her voice firm yet unthreatening. "I mean no harm." The leader of the group, a rugged man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, studying her with a wary eye. "And what brings a woman and her child out here, in the middle of nowhere?" Mary met his gaze unflinchingly. I seek refuge. My home is no longer safe, and my daughter is in need of protection." The man's expression softened slightly, though skepticism lingered in his eyes. "And what makes you think we can offer you that?" "Because," she replied, her voice steady, "I know these mountains. I can guide you through the pass where others would be lost. In return, all I ask is safe passage and supplies for me and my child." There was a tense silence as the men exchanged glances, the crackling of the fire punctuating the unspoken deliberations. Finally, the leader nodded, gesturing for her to join them. "All right then, but know this, you try anything, and you'll regret it." Mary nodded, understanding the unspoken threat. She stepped forward, keeping her daughter close, and settled by the fire. As the warmth seeped into her bones, she listened to the men talk, their words revealing the desperation that had driven them to banditry. They spoke of a plan to raid the town that had once cast her out, to take what they could before the winter claimed them. It was then that Mary realized the gravity of her situation. She was caught between two worlds, one that had rejected her, and another that threatened everything she held dear. As the night deepened and the men drifted into uneasy slumber, her mind raced. She knew she had to act, to somehow turn this situation to her advantage. Her heart ached with the weight of her decision, knowing that whatever path she chose would shape not only her future but also that of her daughter. Beneath the starlit sky, she whispered a silent prayer for guidance, for strength to see her through the trials ahead. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the chill of fate. Mary knew that with the dawn would come the moment of reckoning, and she was determined to face it with the courage and tenacity that had brought her this far. The wind howled through the narrow streets of the town, carrying with it the chilling embrace of the impending storm. Snowflakes danced in chaotic pirouettes, masking the tension that crackled in the air like a static charge. The townsfolk peered out cautiously from behind shuttered windows and half-closed doors, their breath misting in the chill as they watched the lone figure approach. Alone on her horse, Rebecca cut a solitary figure against the swirling backdrop of snow. Her eyes were hard as the ice that clung to her lashes, a determination set in the rigid line of her jaw. A rifle was slung across her back, its wooden stock worn smooth, a silent testament to the journey that had brought her here. This was the woman they had cast out, left to die in the white nothingness of the blizzard. But she had returned, not as the spectre of vengeance some might have expected, but as a force of nature, as inexorable as the storm itself. Behind her, nestled in the folds of her shawl, her child slept unaware of the peril that had once threatened to consume them both. The memory of that cold night haunted the town, the guilt of it, a spectre that whispered in the conscience of every man, woman, and child. She halted her horse in the center of the square, the beast's breath steaming in the frigid air, and dismounted with a fluid grace that belied the months of hardship she had endured. The silence stretched, taut as a wire ready to snap. They had seen the gang before she did, a ragtag assembly of desperados with murder in their eyes and plunder in their hearts. They had come to take what they wanted, and from the looks of it, they would brook no resistance. But Rebecca had not come here to watch the town burn. Her eyes narrowed on the saloon where the bandits had taken their temporary roost, laughter and crude jokes spilling out into the cold. The leader, a grizzled man with a scarred face and an air of menace, lounged at the bar, confidence oozing from every pore. His name was known throughout the territory, Jedediah Crow, a name that sent shivers down the spine of any law-abiding citizen. Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest, a drumbeat of defiance as she strode toward the saloon, the townsfolk parting like a sea before her implacable will. She pushed open the swinging doors, and the room fell silent, eyes turning toward her with a mix of recognition and surprise. Jedediah's gaze settled on her, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Well, look what the storm dragged back," he drawled, voice slick with mockery. "Ain't you a sight for sore eyes?" Rebecca met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'm here to settle a debt," she said, her voice steady as steel. "This town may have wronged me, but I won't stand by and watch you destroy it." Laughter erupted from Jedediah's men, a harsh sound that grated against the walls, but the leader held up a hand, silencing them with a gesture. His eyes sparkled with amusement and perhaps a hint of admiration. "And just how do you plan on doing that, little lady?" he asked, leaning back against the bar with a casual air. "You're outnumbered, outgunned." Rebecca's expression didn't waver. "I've survived worse odds," she replied, a hint of fire in her voice. "And I'm not alone." As if on cue, the townsfolk began to emerge from their hiding places, emboldened by her defiance. They may have abandoned her once, but now they rallied behind her, some clutching rusted firearms, others armed with nothing more than shovels or pickaxes. Jedediah's eyes narrowed as he assessed the growing numbers, the flicker of doubt crossing his features. It was enough for Rebecca. "You can leave peacefully," she offered, her words a challenge and a promise. "Or you can test your luck against me and this town." The tension in the room was palpable, a live wire ready to snap. Jedediah's gaze flicked from her to the assembled townsfolk and back again. For a moment, it seemed as though he might take her up on the offer to leave, but pride and the scent of easy profit overruled caution. "Looks like we're going to have ourselves a shootout," he declared, pushing away from the bar. The room erupted into chaos as his men readied their weapons, and the townsfolk steeled themselves for the coming storm. Rebecca's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm, her resolve as unyielding as the winter wind. The air crackled with tension as both sides faced off, fingers twitching near triggers, eyes locked in a deadly dance. The saloon became the stage for a drama born of desperation and determination, the stakes as high as life and death. In that moment, time seemed to freeze, every breath drawn in anticipation, every heartbeat a countdown. And then, with the inevitability of thunder following lightning, the first shot rang out. The saloon erupted into a cacophony of gunfire, the sharp reports echoing off the walls, a symphony of chaos and retribution. Rebecca moved with the fluidity of a dancer, her rifle a natural extension of her will, each shot precise and purposeful. Around her, the townsfolk fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their fear transformed into a formidable force. Jedediah's men, caught off guard by the unexpected resistance, faltered under the onslaught. The leader himself seemed to move in a haze of disbelief, the certainty of victory slipping through his fingers like sand. Rebecca's gaze locked onto his, and in that instant, she saw the flicker of doubt, the fracture in his confidence. It was enough. With a final, decisive movement, she raised her rifle, her aim steady, her heart resolute. Jedediah's eyes widened in realization, his bravado crumbling as the truth of his defeat dawned upon him. The silence that followed was deafening, a void left in the wake of violence. The townsfolk, battered but unbowed, stood victorious, their unity a testament to the power of redemption and resilience. Rebecca lowered her rifle, the weight of the moment settling over her like a snowfall. She had come here seeking justice, not just for herself, but for the town that had once turned its back on her. And in doing so, she had found something greater, a sense of belonging, a place to call home. As the wind howled through the streets, carrying away the remnants of the storm, Rebecca stood tall, her child cradled in her arms, a beacon of hope in a land as wild and untamed as the mountains that surrounded them. The echoes of gunfire gradually faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the relentless howl of the blizzard sweeping through the town. The once bustling street was now a tapestry of chaos, with bodies strewn amidst the snow, both of bandits and townsfolk alike. The cold air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder, mingling with the metallic temps of blood. As the blizzard raged on, the few remaining townspeople who survived the shootout emerged from their makeshift shelters, eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Among them, Sheriff McAllister, clutching a blood-soaked handkerchief to a grazing wound on his arm, surveyed the devastation. His eyes, filled with a mixture of sorrow and relief, landed on the figure of the woman who had saved them all. Annabelle stood in the center of the street, her figure shrouded in the swirling snow. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale forming small clouds of mist in the freezing air. The rifle in her hands was still warm from the fight, the steel cold against her skin. Her eyes, fierce and unyielding, scanned the street for any lingering threats. There were none. The bandits, caught off guard by her unexpected return and tenacity, had been driven away or lay defeated in the snow. With her child safe, bundled and warm, tucked into a corner of the saloon, Annabelle had turned her focus to the task at hand, defending the town that had once cast her out. The irony wasn't lost on her, and a bitter smile tugged at her lips. The town she had vowed to never return to was now a place she had fought to save. As the remaining townsfolk gathered, their expressions were a mix of gratitude and guilt. Here was the woman they had condemned, her resilience and courage now undeniable. Annabelle, feeling the weight of their eyes upon her, lowered her rifle but remained guarded. Sheriff McAllister took a hesitant step forward, his face etched with remorse and humility. "Annabel," he began, his voice barely carrying over the wind. We owe you a great debt." His words hung in the air, a fragile bridge over the chasm of their shared history. Annabel's gaze was steady, unflinching. "You owe me nothing, Sheriff," she replied, her voice firm. "I did what needed to be done." Her words were met with a collective murmur from the crowd, a ripple of acknowledgement that was both an apology and a plea for forgiveness. The sheriff nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Still, he persisted. "You saved us, and for that, we're grateful." Annabel's expression softened slightly, though her guard remained up. The memory of her banishment was still raw, a wound that had yet to heal. But even as she stood amidst the town that had wronged her, there was a part of her that recognized the necessity of moving forward. The blizzard showed no signs of letting up, and the chill was beginning to seep into her bones. The townspeople, sensing the shift in her demeanor, began to mobilize, attending to the wounded and carrying away the fallen. The saloon, once a place of revelry and vice, now served as a makeshift infirmary, its warmth a refuge against the storm outside. Inside, Annabel found her son asleep, blissfully unaware of the turmoil around him. The sight of his peaceful face brought a tender smile to her lips, a reminder of her strength and resolve. As she watched over him, she felt a presence beside her. It was Martha, the saloon owner, her face haggard but kind. "He's a beautiful boy," Martha said softly, her eyes filled with a warmth that had been absent the last time they met. Annabel nodded, her heart swelling with pride and protectiveness. "He is," she agreed, brushing a gentle hand over his forehead. Martha hesitated, then spoke again, her voice tinged with regret. "We were wrong about you, Annabel. Wrong to turn you away." Annabel met her gaze, the memories of that fateful night rushing back, the hurt, the desperation, and the bitter cold. Yet standing here, in the aftermath of the storm, she felt a new strength. Forgiveness was not something she could offer lightly, but she could offer a chance for understanding. "What's done is done," Annabel replied, her tone even, "but maybe we can learn from it." Martha nodded, her expression one of gratitude and relief. It was a small step, but one that carried the promise of healing and reconciliation. As the hours passed and the blizzard began to wane, the town slowly came back to life. The saloon buzzed with quiet activity, the sounds of whispered conversations and the clink of glasses filling the air. Outside, the snow-covered streets glistened under the pale light of a waning moon, a stark contrast to the earlier scene of violence. Annabel remained by her son's side, watching the townspeople as they worked together to rebuild and recover. The sense of community, so absent before, was now palpable, and she found herself touched by their resilience. Sheriff McAllister approached her once more, his expression earnest. "What will you do now, Annabel?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. She paused, considering the question. Her journey had been one of survival, driven by a fierce love for her child and a determination to defy the odds. The town had been her past, but it didn't have to define her future. "We'll move on," she said finally, her voice steady. "Find a place where we can start anew." The sheriff nodded, understanding in his eyes. "If there's anything we can do to help, just say the word." Annabel appreciated the offer, a gesture that marked a shift in their relationship. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, but she was no stranger to hardship. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Annabel gathered her son in her arms, feeling the warmth of his small body against her. The town, now a tableau of determination and hope, would continue to exist, shaped by the events of the past but not defined by them. As she prepared to leave, the townspeople gathered once more, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They had witnessed the strength of a woman scorned, and in that they found a new respect. Annabel, with her head held high and her son by her side, took a final look at the town. It was a place of sorrow and salvation, both a wound and a bomb. The blizzard had tested them all, and in its wake, they were left to pick up the pieces and forge a new path. With a nod to the sheriff and a faint smile to those gathered, Annabel turned away from the town, her footsteps steady and sure. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was one she was ready to face. As she and her son disappeared into the distance, the townspeople watched in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of what had been and what could yet be. And so the town of Colorado, 1872, stood resilient and hopeful, forever changed by the woman they had once left to die in the blizzard, but but who had returned not just for justice, but to remind them of the power of redemption and the enduring strength of the human spirit. In the heart of Colorado, under a sun that seemed to mock the freezing wind, the small town of Windridge lay battered, both by the relentless snow and the chaos wrought by the bandit attack. The townsfolk moved like ghosts, tending to the wreckage of their homes and lives. Among them, whispers grew about the mysterious savior who had appeared out of the storm, the one they had wronged. Lila, the widow they had cast out into the merciless blizzard, stood at the edge of the town square, her presence a testament to resilience and unyielding spirit. The townspeople, now acutely aware of their actions, approached her with a mixture of awe and shame. Sheriff Tom Hargrave, a man whose conscience had been heavy since the day they expelled Lila, felt the weight of his badge more than ever. His once authoritative stride was now tentative as he walked towards her. "Lila," he began, his voice carrying the weariness of a man who had seen too much. "We owe you a debt that can't be repaid." Lila's eyes, once filled with the warmth of early summer meadows, now held the depth of winter's night. She looked at the sheriff, her expression unreadable, like the mountains that surrounded them. "Tom," she replied, her voice steady, "I didn't come back for gratitude. I came because there's a child who needs a future, and I won't let him grow in bitterness." Around them, townsfolk gathered, their faces etched with a collective shame. They had believed the superstitions, allowed fear to guide their actions, and now stood before the woman they had wronged, hoping for some form of redemption. Among them was Reverend Parker, the town's spiritual guide, who had ironically been one of the loudest voices condemning Lila. He stepped forward, clutching his Bible as if seeking strength from it. "Mrs. Lila," he said, trying to keep his voice from wavering, "I spoke out of fear and ignorance. The storm of our minds was greater than the one outside. We were wrong." Lila met his gaze, nodding slightly. "Fear makes fools of us all, Reverend, but it's what we do after that defines us." Her words were simple, yet they carried the wisdom of someone who had seen beyond the horizon of her own suffering. As if on cue, little Daniel, Lila's son, toddled out from behind her, his eyes reflecting the clear, untainted innocence of childhood. He looked at the people around him, unaware of the history they shared. His small hand reached for his mother's, and Lila's stern demeanor softened. She lifted him up, holding him close, a symbol of what she had fought for. "A new beginning," she said quietly, almost to herself. The townspeople, seeing Daniel, felt a spark of hope. It reminded them that the future was not yet written, and that perhaps they could make amends. Sheriff Hargrave cleared his throat, the sound breaking the silence like a crack of lightning. "We have a lot to rebuild," he said, looking around at the damaged buildings. "But more importantly, we need to rebuild our trust, our sense of community. Lila, if you'll allow it, we'd like you to be a part of that." Lila took a moment, considering the faces around her. Fear had nearly taken everything from her, but it had also forged her into something stronger. "I'll stay," she replied, her voice steady and sure. "But know this, I won't be a symbol for you to ease your conscience. I came back for justice, not just for me, but for all of us, for a chance to do right by Daniel and by each other." Her words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement. The people of Windridge, having faced their own storm, saw a path forward. It would not be easy, but it would be traveled together. Over the next few weeks, the town slowly began to heal. Lila took a role in the community, not as a leader appointed by others, but as a guiding force shaped by her own experiences. She helped organize the rebuilding efforts, her keen eye and steady hand, ensuring that not just buildings were repaired, but hearts as well. Children, once wary of the stories surrounding her, now played freely with Daniel, their laughter a healing salve over the town's wounds. The adults watched, learning from their innocence, seeing in them the promise of a future unmarred by the past. On Sundays, Lila attended church, sitting alongside the very people who once cast her out. Reverend Parker, in his sermons, often spoke of redemption and the courage to face one's own demons. His words carried new weight, for they were no longer just about spirituality, but about the tangible change in their community. Lila, though forgiving, never forgot. She carried the past as a reminder of what fear could do when left unchecked. Yet, she also saw it as a testament to what courage and conviction could achieve. She spoke to the townsfolk about her journey through the blizzard, not as a tale of survival, but as a lesson in tenacity and hope. As the seasons turned and the snow melted, Windridge began to thrive once more. New settlers arrived, drawn by the promise of the West and the stories of a town that had found redemption. Lila, standing on the porch of her rebuilt home, watched them arrive, knowing that the legacy she was building was not just for her and Daniel, but for all who would call this place home. She had returned to Windridge not just for justice, but to ensure that others would never face the same storm alone. In the end, the town learned that strength lay not in its buildings or its leaders, but in its people and their shared humanity. Lila's return had taught them that, and in doing so, she carved her own place in the annals of their history, a legend of the West, not of vengeance, but of enduring resilience and the power of forgiveness. As the years passed, Lila became known as the heart of Windridge, her story told around campfires and in the fading light of evening. She was a symbol of what could be achieved when one stood firm against the storm, both within and without. And so, the legend grew, inspiring others in the wild, untamed West to seek justice, to find strength in adversity, and to remember that even in the darkest of blizzards, there was always a path back to the light. As the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Lila stood with Daniel at her side, looking out at the town she had helped to save. The future was bright, and as she held her son close, she knew that together they had written a new story, one of hope and redemption. And for those who hear the tale of Lila of Windridge, remember this: sometimes the fiercest storms forge the strongest souls. If you enjoyed Lila's story and want to hear more tales of courage and resilience from the Wild West, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. There's a world of stories out there waiting to be discovered.